Our next project is to have a headstone placed in Denver, Colorado, where Helen Peters, the woman who named the Ouija board and first helped get it patented, is buried. And you're going to learn more about Helen Peters, William Fuld, and Elijah Bond shortly. So I first want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to all my friends, and oh man, this sucks. This sucks. This is my first time public speaking, and I'm very not comfortable at all speaking in front of a crowd. I know, but having you here, it does make it easier for me, so thank you so much. I want to thank Robert Murch, of course. He's, besides being the world expert in Ouija, the president of the Talking Board Historical Society, he's been a mentor to me and really helped me leave my comfort zone very much to be speaking here tonight. So thank you, Murch, appreciate it. Thank you to Ash, Lucian, and Adam at the Satanic Temple for having us. Salem needs a place like this, a place to help celebrate the strange, the unusual, as well as to educate. So if you don't know much about the Satanic Temple while you're here, please try to learn more. I appreciate their support, their friendship, and them making Salem home to their headquarters. So here we are in Salem, a town that's known for its dark past. The town openly celebrates its place for accusing more than 200 of witchcraft and executing at least 20. The town has become one of the most desired places to celebrate Halloween. And really, they really celebrate the entire month of October here. They come here to learn about the witch trials, be around other people into creepy and macabre things, and because they believe the town is haunted. And they dress up like witches and skeletons, as well as superheroes and cartoon characters. Well, the Salem witch trials that began right here all began from people's fear of the devil, fear that witches were working for Satan, and witches could possess you, they could take control of your body. Well, sometimes the Ouija board shares that same distinction or stigma. Some people believe it's a tool of the devil, and if you use it, you could become possessed, just like the young girls who played a fortune-telling game with Chichaba in 1692. So they're called a witch board, a devil board, spirit board, talking board, but Ouija is a trademarked name for a brand of talking board. And Ouija has a connection to Salem. It was made in Salem, less than a mile from where we are now, on the same street, Bridge Street, from 1966 to 1991. Now, this is probably the most iconic Ouija image, and how awesome is this to have this supposed tool of the devil made in Salem, Mass on it. Now, sorry, Calvin. Now, we've heard stories from Parker Brothers employees who've told us that some people would refuse to work on the day that Ouija was made, and that other employees, they wouldn't work on the production line that it was made. They were just too scared. So, and we've also heard stories of people making a joke that it was their job to put the demon in the box at the end of the production line. So, like the city of Salem, the Ouija kind of straddles this line of both having a sinister, evil side and a fun, campy side. But tonight, seeing as how we're in Salem, we're at the Satanic Temple, and it's October, we want to talk a little bit more about its darker side. So, speaking of the devil, I'd like to introduce you to this handsome devil. This is Calvin Von Crush.
Hey guys, how are you? Oh, thanks. So I think the burning question in the room right now is, where did Ouija boards come from? And we've already talked about physically where they came from. We know they were made in Salem, and we know they were made in Baltimore. But we're talking about the concept. How did this come about? How did people realize that we could put letters on a board and somehow use it as a spirit communication device? So that concept really needed to start festering somewhere else. And that festering took place in this area right here. This is called the Burned Over District in northwestern New York. And the thing that was burned over was essentially people. And I don't mean like a barbecue, I mean their religious belief. So many traditional religions had come through the region and converted so many people that there were no new people to be converted to their faiths. So in order for a new religion to take root in this area, they would have to have some very, very extraordinary claims to get people's attention. One of those people was Joseph Smith. He claimed that an angel led him to golden plates, which helped him pen the Book of Mormon and form the Latter-day Saint movement. And then William Miller claimed that we were living in the end times already and that Christ was on his way back, and he gained a following of Millerites. The Millerites would later move on to become the Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists. But the one we're most concerned with is one called spiritualism. And in spiritualism, they believe there is no true death and we exist in spirit eternally, and anyone can learn how to communicate with those spirits. It was in this unassuming cottage on March 31st, 1848, which just happens to be the eve of April Fool's Day, two young girls claimed to have made contact with an entity they called Mr. Splitfoot, a clever nod to the devil's cloven hooves. They developed a system of knocks to communicate, such as 1 for yes and 2 for no. This would eventually become known as spirit rapping. The whole town would end up gathering in this tiny cabin just so they could see the odd events. Now, the Fox sisters were very young when this phenomenon was said to first occur. Maggie was only 15 and Kate was 12. The older sister in the group, a third one, Leah, was the real brains of the operation. She took one look at their abilities and she knew there was money to be made. She organized local events where people could pay money to watch. It wasn't long before they were traveling the world as the original rap superstars. I spent dozens of minutes on the Photoshop for these guys, so I hope you enjoy. Now, one would think that we had learned our lesson about listening to young girls about supernatural events, but old habits die hard, I guess. Now, word of the Fox sisters and a few other American copycats would jump the pond and inspire Europeans to dabble in spirit communication. One of the most influential products of that experimentation was the creation of the planchette. On June 10th, 1853, Allan Kardec would be present to document spirit rapping seance, where the spirits would instruct sitters to drive a pencil through an upturned basket in order to communicate with a bit more speed. Spiritualism was grabbing bits and pieces from the occult and teachings from exotic religions. Just like you guys kind of see with the Ouija board, it picks up a little bit from the Far East, from voodoo, things like that. Many wealthy, influential people were adopting it as their given faith. Even Mary Todd Lincoln believed in it. She was said to have had seances right in the White House. The esoteric was something good people practiced and not just witches and outcasts. The alleged powers of spirit communication and divination were starting to get pulled away from the elite few and made available to the common man. Home circles were very common. We believe it was at one of these such events that talking boards started popping up. Here we see a newspaper image of an example people were using in as early as 1886. And here's the article it appeared in. As with anything that pulls money away from the pulpit, it was almost instantly demonized. In spite of its often high class and politically aligned strength, spiritualism and spirit communication always had its classical antagonist in Christianity. As with most great ideas, it's not really who invented it, but who secured the patent that matters. On February 10th, 1891, Elijah Bond was the man smart enough to see the potential in securing the rights to this game or toy. You've already seen the fancy stone we put up for him to immortalize his patent image and his contribution to history. Now, Charles Kennard didn't have the patent, but he had something even more important. He had money, and loads of it. He also owned a novelty company along with a few other men. Elijah Bond would assign the patent over to Kennard and another associate, William Maupin, who then signed the rights over to the Kennard Novelty Company on February 28th of 1891. Much of Ouija's mysterious origin has been originally attributed to Kennard, some saying he stole the idea from a local furniture maker and undertaker named E.C. Reish. He is also credited as being present when the board named itself. And this pretty lady right here, I call her Bob's girlfriend, the only woman he's ever chased after. This is Helen Peters, Noseworthy, and she's actually the woman responsible for the name Ouija. She was Elijah Bond's sister-in-law and was believed to be a strong medium. She asked the board what it would like to be called, and it spelled out O-U-I-J-A. When she asked what it meant, the board spelled out good luck. Miss Peters was also said to accompany Elijah Bond to the patent office to secure the patent. They did this many times and were rejected until the chief patent officer took an interest in the device. Legend states that he assured the pair that if the board could spell out his name, unknown to both Bond and Peters, he would assign the patent. The board did just that, and the rest is history. Now, even though Helen was responsible for naming the board, she would eventually turn her back on it. The family owned a collection of Civil War buttons that they had collected from battlefields, and they went missing. So naturally, they turned to the occult to find the answers, and they broke out the Ouija board. We're not sure what the Ouija board spelled out as an answer, but it tore the family apart, and she walked away from it and eventually became a Jehovah's Witness herself. After 1 year of incorporation, the majority of directors were relieved from duty, and the company renamed the Ouija Novelty Company. Now, William Fuld is the name that almost everybody associates with the Ouija board. You can see his name on most of the vintage boards in here. He was an industrious young man, and he was eventually placed at the helm. Under his keen sense of direction, the Ouija board would soar to unprecedented heights and become a sensation feared and loved the world over. When he invented and produced many different toys, including the first returning pool table, none would ever consume him like the Ouija board. On February 24th, 1940, while supervising the replacement of a flagpole, Fuld fell from the roof of his Hartford, Maryland factory. A rib would puncture his lung as a result of this fall and cause his death. As he lay dying, he made his children swear they would never sell the Ouija board. You're up, cutie. Hey, I'll take that.
So let me ask, has anyone here ever lost a friend or relative and maybe regretted that they weren't able to say goodbye to them? Or maybe the last time you saw them, you had wished you had been nicer to them, or you would just appreciate your time together? Well, grieving people search for comfort, and I think sometimes have turned to the Ouija board for that kind of closure. At the time that the talking board came out, every family had been affected by a death in the Civil War. So try to imagine that your father, your uncle, your brother, your husband go off to fight, and you just never see him again. You don't know what happened. Now maybe you're lucky and you're notified that they died, but maybe you aren't and you just don't know. And would you want to find out what happened to him or talk to him again? Well, Christians believe that consulting mediums, psychics, talking boards is a sin, and that the person you may be talking to isn't really who they say they are. It's actually one of Satan's fallen angels trying to trick you. And they believe that the cost of necromancy could be your soul, that you're cursed or you're possessed. Sorry. But what do you believe? Do you believe that we can communicate with the dead? We're going to tell you a few stories of people's faith in the Ouija board. That when they listened to the board, they believed what it said, and they felt they had no choice but to do what it told them to do. You can decide if Satan is to blame, if maybe any of them were mentally unstable, or if man is evil by nature and maybe these voices from beyond are really from the darkest side of themselves coming through. So the first story I want to tell, kind of the first known death associated with the Ouija board. It's from 1900, and I'm just going to read the actual newspaper article. Thank you, Calvin. Bridgeport woman's explanation for suicide. She was a spiritualist and said she was wanted on the other side. So Miss Sarah Griffin took strychnine, told her husband, and died. Bridgeport, Connecticut, May 17th. Driven to desperation by her inability to fathom the mysteries of the Ouija board, the acknowledged leader of the local community of spiritualists, Miss Sarah Elizabeth Griffin, last night absorbed curious quantities of strychnine and passed into the spirit world. God commanded me to die, she said to her aged husband after she had taken the poison. She had carried the poison to bed with her, and when all was still, swallowed the fatal potion. She was subject to horrible dreams, and when her husband was aroused by her moans, he at first thought nothing of it, as she frequently had nightmares. Then he heard her voice summoning him. When he reached her side, she extended her hand and said, "Papa, forgive me." But it was to be. They came for me tonight. They told me I should not delay. This night they wanted me, and I have done it. I will soon be with them. Oh, how glad I am to have been called. They kept calling and calling, saying, "Tonight, tonight." They were relentless and said it was decreed I should leave at once. So I have merely obeyed the summons. But you will not be alone long, dear, for I shall come for you soon. Yes, sooner than you realize. Well, these were her last words, Before a physician arrived, the woman was dead. And until recently, Mrs. Griffin was a prominent Methodist church worker, but as of late had given all of her time to the study of spiritualism. The Ouija board, one of her favorite companions, she became so absorbed in the mysteries of the cult that her brain weakened, and on Tuesday night, it finally collapsed. The imaginary summons entered her head. She brooded on it until it taught her into obeying it. She answered a call to die.
So, John, I'm from Connecticut. I've been to Bridgeport a number of times, and it happens to be the broken glass capital of the world. I think she just killed herself to get out of Bridgeport, honestly. That's really all it is. So this one is not nearly as upbeat as John's. Jenny Morrow is killed in a hit-and-run accident in El Cerrito, California in 1920. And naturally, her parents are devastated. And what do devastated parents do? They turn to the occult to try and reach their daughter, and they start having continuous Ouija seances around the clock. They have the neighbors come in and they form seance circles. But when they get a hold of who they believe is their daughter, they refuse to let anybody leave because they think it's going to break up the energy and they'll never be able to talk to her again. So eventually, the police were called. All in total, victims included a 15-year-old girl found naked who claimed it helped her communicate with spirits better, and a police officer who ripped off his clothes and ran hysterically into a local bank. But that one could have just been a birthday strippogram, we're not sure. Officials quickly held a town hall meeting and decided to bring in mental health professionals to examine the entire population of 1,200 people. All in total, 7 people were admitted to psychiatric ward, and the town went on to unsuccessfully ban Ouija boards. Another happy tale. This one is actually a love story. Comes from 1929 on the Cattaraugus Reservation near Buffalo. Tribal healer Nancy Bowen and her friend Lila Jimerson used the board hoping to learn who killed Bowen's husband. The board told them exactly who murdered her husband and gave the killer's address. During the seance, the board spelled out the words, "They killed me," and the name Clotilda. Purely by chance, Jimerson offered up a woman she knew named Clotilda Marchand. She was married to a gentleman named Henry. Bowen was shaken up by the situation, and things worsened. Following the session, multiple letters describing Clotilda as a vengeful witch showed up in Bowen's mail. They explained that the woman placed a hex on her husband and that she killed him out of jealousy. Soon, Bowen was convinced the strange woman was a murderer and that she was going to kill her. So naturally, being a tribal healer and knowing folk magic, she attempted to kill her using hexes. But when that didn't work...
Calvin, stop.
Hammer time. She decided to... Oh, it gets worse. It gets worse. Using the address provided by the Ouija board, Bowen showed up at Clotilda's door and battered her head in with a hammer. Then, just for good measure, she stuffed chloroform-soaked rags down her throat. Witnesses told police a Native American woman was seen at Clotilda's, and police were led to the reservation. Now, Clotilda's husband, Henry, knew Jimerson, intimately, in fact. The two had been having an affair. Jimerson manipulated her friend to kill Clotilda by using the Ouija board, in hopes of finally being able to have a relationship with Henry. Henry denied any involvement in the crime. The court believed he was somehow involved in the plot too, but they had no proof. Henry's role in the murders was never made clear, and no charges were brought up.
Oh, boy. Yeah, great.
Tough act to follow, bud.
Yeah, thanks. Jerk. All right. So in 1916, a 21-year-old named Dorothy wins the American Bathing Beauty Contest. And she beats out almost 50,000 other entries. Men, they go crazy for her. And she ends up receiving over 100 marriage proposals. But she ends up settling for a U.S. Navy man named Ernest Hurley. And the two of them elope, and within 2 years, they have 2 children, a daughter, Maddie, and a son, David. And over the next few years, Dorothy starts having health problems. And the family must keep moving for the problems with their sinuses. Well, in 1933, they finally settle down in the high mountains of Arizona. And it's there where Dorothy meets her new younger neighbor named Kent, who's a cattle rancher. Sorry. And Dorothy is older now. Men don't pay attention to her as much. She's isolated, alone. Her husband's usually off working. Well, she starts turning to the Ouija board, and she seeks comfort from the answers it gives to her questions. Well, one day, she sees some petroglyphs on a rock nearby, so she consults the spirit board about them. Well, the board tells her that there's gold buried underneath the rock. She believes the board. She goes to her husband, she begs and pleads him. He ends up digging in the spot, uses dynamite, but doesn't come across anything. So now, he's pretty upset, and the couple start arguing more and more. Well, a few weeks later, Dorothy and the daughter are now playing the Ouija board, and the board spells out a message. Daddy must die. So Maddie ends up asking her mother, well, who must kill Daddy? Mommy? And the board spells back MT. And the mother explains, well, that's the initials. That's you, MT, Maddie Turley. Well, now Maddie, she believes the board. Well, just a few days later, Maddie and her father are returning from the house after doing some chores. Maddie's behind her father, and 2 shots ring out. She shoots her father in the back. And as her father lays bleeding on the ground, he just thinks it's an accident, and he reprimands her for not using the gun, not being more careful with the gun. Well, when the authorities ask her, just 5 weeks later, Mr. Shirley ends up dying from the injuries. So when authorities asked Maddie about it, she at first exclaims, no, it was just an accident. I shot Daddy on accident. But they explained that the bullet projection comes from above and not below, and that it had to have been her on purpose. Well, she quickly changes her story and admits, it was me, I did it. I had to do it. Ouija told me to do it. And when Ouija tells you what to do, you must obey. So the authorities arrest Dorothy and Maddie is sentenced to school for girls until she's 18. She never changes her story. She says the whole time, the Ouija board told me to kill my father, and I did. Mrs. Turley is arrested, and the courts believe that she pushed the planchette to tell her, she had pushed the planchette into spelling the message to make her daughter kill. But what would you believe if you were Maddie? She's playing a Ouija board with her mother, probably the person she trusts the most. She'd have no reason to believe that her mother would push the planchette to send this message. I lost it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just lost it.
Oh, what is it?
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, the mother is eventually released from jail.
You want to go back one?
No, I just want to end this. Oh, fuck.
Oh, he was
I'm
doing good.
so-
Guys, this is John's first time. He's killing it. He's doing really, really
Obviously, it's not my first time public speaking. Let's just go to the next one.
Yeah, we'll finish up.
Yeah.
So both of them believed at least at one point that the board was said to be true, either being told to look for gold or being told to kill. But what would you believe if you were Maddie playing the Ouija board with your mother? Probably the person you trust the most. She had to have felt safe playing with her. She'd have no reason to believe her mother was pushing the planchette. You guys would believe your parents, right? If they told you to kill their dad, right? Yeah, no problem, man. Teamwork. So this is actually one of my favorite stories. Mrs. Hurd of Kansas City was playing with the Ouija board alone, as we've probably already heard is a bad idea. And the board tells her that her husband is cheating on her and stealing their money. So while he's sleeping, she ties him up to the bed, and when he wakes up, she starts torturing him, demanding he tell her where the money is. Now, Hubert, he's well into his 70s. There is no way that he is ever going to be able to cheat on his wife. But he does realize she is crazy. And while she's torturing him, he comes up with a plan to get free. He tells her that he does have the money and it's buried in the yard. So when she leaves the room to go dig it up, he manages to free himself. When she comes back, he blows her away with a gun that he had hidden in the nightstand. Police are involved, and they take in all the evidence, and they realize that he's telling the truth. Oh, no, it's cool. It happens. So police take in all the evidence, and they soon realize that he is telling the truth, and he is never charged because it is ruled a self-defense.
Sorry. All right, so when I was... What is it? Yeah. All right, when I was researching this next story, I could only imagine, I realized it happens on Christmas Eve, and I could really only imagine retelling it as this famous holiday classic. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and before a fire took their house. Paul and Margaret used a Ouija board and claimed a demon got out. Paul exclaimed, "It's taken the family dog." So he drowned his loyal companion and chopped her up like a log. He dismembered the body to remove her microchip, stuffed her in a storm drain, but she still didn't fit. When neighbors became suspicious, they alerted police. And Paul, he admitted he had killed the evil beast. Well, 2 weeks later, Paul was still under arrest, but now his wife and daughter wanted to contact the dog they felt was possessed. The planchette moved, but only one message was received, that they too soon would die, and the both of them believed. Sleeping pills were taken, and the house was set on fire, but they did not die, because more pills were required. So, was the devil to blame? Was it poor mental health, or was the devil to blame? Let's ask the Ouija board, Calvin, unless you believe it's only just a game.
Is it just a game? In fact, from the very beginning, Elijah Bond, up at the top, you can see it. It did say toy or game. But some Ouija makers and Ouija ripoff artists proclaimed otherwise. In 1920, the Baltimore Talking Board Company sued the IRS, proclaiming that its boards were much more than mere toys and should not be subjected to a game tax. The company argued that it was a device to communicate to the other side. After losing in federal and appellate courts, they appealed to the Supreme Court in 1922, which refused to hear the case. And of course, in case you were wondering, ages 8 and up are allowed to play with this gateway to hell. So after all of this conversation, we have to ask ourselves, do Ouija boards really work? I'm a devout atheist and skeptic, and I am here to tell you that yes, Ouija boards really do work. It's one of the reasons why they've been able to proliferate for so many years. But it's not ghosts, it's not demons, it's not spirits that are making it work. It's something much, much eviler. It's actually the human brain. Scientists believe it's something called the ideomotor response. And ideo means idea, and motor means movement. So it's your body producing a response to a thought that you're having. So you're essentially filling in the gaps for what you want to see happen. At OuijaCon, we had a group from Denmark came, and they fit people with these special glasses that tracked your eyeball movement. And what they found was that people's eyeballs were moving to the letter before the planchette would go. So it's clearly something that you need to see in order for you to get the answers that you're responding to. And Ouija boards are not the only device that uses the ideomotor response to power itself. Dowsing, everyone has seen this, probably in tons of Bugs Bunny cartoons and stuff like that, right? This is the same thing. You're bending a stick, and your body's actually moving it to locate where you think water might be. In the Victorian era, there were tons of games very, very similar to Ouija boards that were played. We had something called table tipping, pendulums. You guys have seen those, right? Where there's a little crystal on a chain. There's even a weird game in the back on the left-hand side. You can see they're spinning a hat around a table. automatic writing planchettes, of course, and probably everybody's favorite if you've ever been to a sleepover. Has anyone ever played light as a feather, stiff as a board? Yeah? That's actually idiomotor response too. You don't think your body's doing it. Yeah, we can all do it later. Break time. Oh yeah, good. We're gonna need about 12 people for that one to work, all right? Yeah, so that's it, guys. Oh, we got more, John.
Oh, yeah.
We got more.
Thanks, Cal. All right, so the Ouija and the devil have had a partnership for over 125 years. From its first reference as the Devil Board in 1886, in Ohio, ground zero to where the talking board was born, to more recent times where kids have claimed to be possessed after using a Ouija app on their phone. We're going to show you some footage of an 18-year-old girl from Peru, and she's believed to be possessed after using a Ouija app on her phone.
I
So-
super liked her on Tinder, no response.
I cut the clip down, but all right. So here's another clip I'm going to show from 2014. This time it's 3 family members in Mexico City. They're believed to become possessed because only minutes into the game, one of them starts thrashing around in a trance-like state, and the other 2 start showing feelings of blindness, deafness, hallucinations, and muscle spasms. Now, paramedics, they're called after a local priest refused to perform an exorcism because none of the 3 were regular churchgoers. All right, so in in February of this year, it was reported that more than 20 kids became possessed after using a Ouija app on their phone. Witnesses say that the kids started fainting, some of them were screaming, some of them started screaming out the devil was going to take them. Well, when I was researching this, it reminded me a lot of the Salem witch trials, where one kid acts possessed and everyone else kind of joins in and seems to be afflicted too. But most media, they portray this as a Ouija possession, but actually these kids were playing a game called Charlie Charlie. And that game is kind of similar to a pendulum board where you dangle a pencil over a piece of paper that says yes or no over it. Now, that's a lot different than a Ouija board where you use a planchette and messages can be received. So why did the media call it a Ouija possession? Did they just not know the difference between the 2 games? Were they too lazy? Or is it just easier to accuse Ouija? In an age of science, why are people still so scared of a piece of wood? Well, is it because it's always been used as a device to talk to the other side? Or because the possession stories have only intensified in the last couple of years? Well, Hollywood has certainly helped perpetuate the fear that people have towards a talking board. In the last 10 years, there's been over a dozen movies featuring a spirit board. A Ouija board helps tell the ultimate ghost story, where you're a part of the story. You move the planchette, and the story happens through you. Has everyone seen the movie The Exorcist? All right. So what happens to Reagan? What happens to Reagan when she uses the Ouija board alone? She becomes possessed by Captain Howdy, aka Pazuzu. But how do we know she became possessed from using the Ouija board? It's implied, but never really talked about or confirmed. In the movie, it's taken off a book that's based on a true story. But the Ouija board is never mentioned in any of the case files for that. So today, we think if we play a Ouija board alone, we could become possessed. But Hollywood, they just made that fact up. The TBHS calls this a Ouija-stition. Bad things can happen to you when you do or don't do certain things while using a Ouija board. Some other ones are, courtesy of Rick Schreck's artwork. Awesome. Don't play in a graveyard. Never leave the planchette on the board if you aren't using it. If the planchette falls from the board, a spirit will get loose. If the planchette repeatedly makes a figure 8, it means an evil spirit is in control of the board. Always say goodbye. And there's only one way to dispose of a Ouija board. Break it into 7 pieces, sprinkle it with holy water, and bury it. And never ask about God or when you're going to die. You ever heard any of those or any other ones? Well, the Talking Board Historical Society gets dozens of emails from people concerned that they have a Ouija board in their house. They either tell us stories of hauntings or unexplained events in the house. They had found it tucked away somewhere and just were too spooked and wanted it out. They're afraid and they don't know what they should do because of these Ouija-stitions. Well, we gladly accept them as donations, and we've brought a few of them with us tonight. Some of them with the stories from people that tell of these hauntings. The superstitions people have about the board and the mystery, if it really works or not, is what's kept it relevant for so long, even in a technical age. It's the reason why millions and millions of these are sold. It's why I'm fascinated with the history, and I hope we've entertained you as much as the board's entertained us. Thank you very much for coming tonight.